Okay, good morning. To my talk, rebuilding an aircraft on the fly. That's me at work, no kidding. You might know this historic picture. She is repairing a tire of a plane while it's flying. And this is somehow I feel sometimes as well. What I will present to you in the next 30 minutes is as this picture based on a true story and how we iterated our user interface at trivago. The talk in general, it's about the topic design system, and I would like to do a very, very short introduction into design systems. This is a graphic by Nate Baldwin, one of the Adobe designers, and he tried to visualize the anatomy of design systems. Design systems do have impact on the whole organization, not only its development teams. Nevertheless, in my talk, I will more concentrate on the engineering side of design systems, and I'm very happy that in the talk, talk before my talk, already stuff like Learner, which I will also talk a bit about, was already introduced. Let's start with a few definitions first. A CSS framework, I hope most of you know what a CSS framework is. It is a production-ready assets which can be consumed by the product. Normally they are modular, scalable, and you can basically integrate them very easily in a continuous integration environment. Scooter from Dropbox is a very good example of a CSS framework. A style guide is also a definition I would very shortly introduce. As a design system itself is only purely assets and code, you need something to demonstrate how the patterns work, whether they should be used with references, and that's what we basically call a style guide. Again, from Scooter, you can basically see here is described what a banner is and when it actually should be used. If you would scroll down, you would also see a representation of this banner, how that works. The pattern library is a repository, basically. So basically how we defined it at trivago, which can be reused and people can clone and use the code of that repository to build the applications. A design system itself is then the entirety of all the stuff. So it also includes the people which are working with the system as well as the processes. Some examples about design system. I'm pretty sure you know Google Material Design, one of the, I think, most famous design systems. One which I really like is the Salesforce Lightning Design System. Then we have this one from VMware, Clarity Design System, and recently launched, I think last month, was the Shopify design system. So why do we need a design system? There are different reasons for a design system. Of course, it also has impact on your brand identity, on your corporate identity, but I will focus a bit more why we need it from a technical perspective. And I will therefore concentrate on the development side of the design system. The more consistent your design, the more consistent your code will be. I think that's pretty obvious. With that, we wanted to reduce technical debt and improve our overall quality. I will later show you some really shocking examples how we basically destroyed somehow our user interface. And we, of course, became very slow and was developing features 2 years ago, so we needed to rethink how we build our user interfaces. Yeah, let's go back to 2012 when I joined trivago. I don't know who of you is familiar with the CSS specificity graph. It's a terrible word. But basically, this graph is way too high. So basically here we have a specificity from 412, and that's basically you need to write such a selector to create this specificity. I don't know how the people at trivago, before I joined them, were able to manage that. But after they created that, they basically hired me and asked me to fix that. When I joined trivago, this was the UI behind that graph, and we started setting up a dedicated front-end team, because before that, the development was very much driven by full-stack devs without having any experts on front-end or front-end design. So I started setting up a small team. We did a few facelifts with a bit of common sense on writing CSS. And this was how our graph looked like in 2012, and you can see it's already massively reduced and improved. The maximum, I think, is now around 230 instead of 400, and the average is below 100. So we still had peaks at the beginning of the style sheet, which caused you some issues, because if you already have a very high specificity in the beginning of the style sheet, you might need to overwrite it later, which you actually don't want to. This was how it looked like in 2012. The metrics were much better, but we had some severe issues. So first of all, we built a Frankenstein with icons. You might know that you need icons for a user interface, and at that time we had an image sprite, so don't be shocked. This was our image sprite, which we used in 2012. There are a lot of redundant images and icons in. I just remember that we once tried to remove one of those icons, and then it was somewhere used, and then we had to roll back. It was not really maintainable, because also there were just PSD files, and there was no organization. Nobody knew where the icons were used, and so on. And we had a lot of CSS, because we reinvented all the time stuff. So basically, we had all CSS in the world, which also later led to the fact that we couldn't release anymore, because we had a check, which you might know that Internet Explorer, the older versions, have a selector limit of 4096. And we exceeded that. So basically, if we would have released, Internet Explorer would not have any layout anymore. We had a desktop-first approach, which was also not good especially for mobile devices. And now my actually most favorite slides are the 50 Shades of Grey, because we didn't have a style guide, we had a lot of inconsistencies. That's the 50 Shades of Grey. That happens if you don't have a style guide and everybody says, oh, I want to have it a bit more gray, or I like that much better, or whatever. The sad thing is that not only happens to gray, it also happened with green. We make kind of money with green, because that's our button where we forward the customers to the partner side, but we have also learned that the more green you have doesn't necessarily mean that you earn more money. Orange, we were slightly better in orange, only 12. I'm actually not sure where we use orange, but at least we had already 12 colors defined. And blue. And because of having no single source of truth, we invented UI code all the time. Footer number 1. I think that was on the company pages. So then you did a click, and then you had that footer. This was on our members area. With another click, you landed on another side application which had that footer, which also looks quite broken. And then our main product had that footer. So basically, we had a new footer with every page load. This caused, of course, an overlay complex CSS and DOM structure, which then led to much confusion in code. And that's actually really a real-life example of an excerpt of one of our SCSS files with a lot of valid questions in it. So basically, the first question, why is set index so high? The next one is basically a killer argument to don't touch that file at all, because it tells you that RTL are our right-to-left platforms, which we, for example, in Israel. So if you would touch that piece of code, maybe the whole platform will blow up. Then other questions, gray equals green. Yeah. As a process, we were kind of very lean. So it was a JPEG to driver task-driven development. So you had a driver, added a task, attached a JPEG file to it, and then the end result was OK. Not really pleasant. So we had some severe issues with our UI layer. As already said in the introduction of my talk, in 2015, we started to create the initial base of a design system, first with a few knowledge pages in Confluence, and we started to create our own CSS framework. Actually, through that stuff which happened in the past, we actually have learned a lot how to not write CSS, and this time we wanted to do it correctly. We created that framework, and we did a very, very large-scale CSS refactoring project at the end of 2015, which I was very grateful to talk about on a lot of conferences in Europe last year. This was a 4 weeks project with 15 people involved. And with that, we applied some best practices and various methodologies like block element modifier, object-oriented CSS, inverse triangle CSS, and moved our front-end build stack from static to Node, which also allowed us, for example, to add post-processing, to add plugins, and to improve our code. As a reference again, the code before the refactoring, and that's the graph after. So you can see that especially in the beginning, we now have a very flat curve. So basically also the curve should basically go up here, and at the beginning it should be very flat. And that's what we had achieved with this refactoring project. So we had it now need CSS framework since then. This was the part of this circle about the UI layer and CSS framework. The next couple of slides I would like to talk about processes, people, and integration. Some issues here with my... after the refactoring, we set up a dedicated team, which was the core digital design system, which took part of the design part of the system, and my team, which is the UI engineering team. And in very close collaboration, we now started, after the refactoring, to actually build components based on this new system we had created. Goal of those teams were to take over the ownership of everything which is somehow in between design and development. For example, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, so this more front-end related stuff. Actually, there are a lot of topics which are in that area. For example, it's about usability, accessibility, semantics, integration, performance, and so on. And so we decided to define topic owners for some areas. E.g., somebody took over the accessibility part, which then also, of course, includes semantics and usability. Same with animations and also belonging to usability, while others maybe a bit more concentrated on the functional side of this design system and took care of the integration and the JS framework. Related to team structure, there are different team models how you can run a design system. This was what we tried to do before we set up those teams. So basically, before I've created that team, working in a feature team, and I said, oh, I built now my own kind of mini bootstrap, and then ask other people to use that. That didn't actually really work. So basically, it's like we built a design system based on our needs, and you should totally use it. Did not really work. Then we moved over to a more centralized approach with the 2 teams I showed before. It worked very well for the refactoring and for the initial version, but didn't really scale because we built a design system without knowing actually the concrete needs of the feature teams itself. So that's basically why before we went into this mode after the refactoring to actually tackle the components, that we still kept a centralized team which took care and was responsible for maintaining the guidelines and creating roadmaps. But we had contributors from different teams who basically contributed to the system as well. So we built a design system together, which then basically everybody should use. Last topic for process. We chose atomic design as our methodology to create modular interfaces. I have a very short animation here, what atomic design is about, if you have not heard of it before. So basically, you try to make your user interface very granular. So you start with atoms, which in that case, for example, is the label, the input field, and the button. From that, you can then create a molecule, which is the search field, which then goes into an organism, which is already kind of part of the site. And then you could create templates, which we skipped, and the pages are actually then built out of those atoms, molecules, and organisms, which very much helps you to reuse code. Yeah, so I talked now a bit about process. It's actually not that good readable. Let's move over to the rebuilding itself. As said, we first refactored the CSS base and basically did a disposable refactoring of old code. I can explain to you now why we had to do that. because of course, if you create a new CSS framework and a new design system and have an application like trivago, the hotel search running, you cannot just release a new business-critical component. You should actually test it before that. You also know the impact of that rebuild. So we started then, after we had done this refactoring, to actually iterate on new UI components. A few weeks later, we then built our new critical business component. This is our item element, so basically the search result, which has now a bit better content structure. So you can see on the right side, we just have prices. On the left side, it's the content access. And then we released that. And we are data informed, and we released that as an A/B test. And that was actually also the first time where we were able to convince our management that all the stuff which we had done over a year actually had a very good impact on our development speed. As you can see here, that's the first number is the percentage of how this A/B test runs. So the first release was with 5%, and then you can see the conversion rate dropped -9. That's two metrics which we have. The first one was -9, the other one was -5. And then because of our modular new approach and all this framework and the system, we were able to very, very fast iterate on the components. As you can see here, those numbers are the days how long it was running. So basically the first trial was 11 days, and we realized, okay, it doesn't get better. Then we did an iteration, then at 3 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, and so on. And after a very, very short time frame, we were basically able to have a neutral, kind of neutral conversion for our a new UI component. Then we moved over to other components because we first decided let's do our most business critical component, and then we moved over, for example, to rebuild our header and other components. Also, we rebuilt whole sub-applications which are not that complex, for example, like our hotel search core product. That's our member area where you can basically favorite hotels, and then you can later look them up again and have overviews over your bookings or hotel lists. So we tackled the components. Coming back to the icons, there was this huge image sprite. This is our item element, how it looked before, and I have highlighted here the stars next to the hotel. And actually, what we used, this was 2 pages of Style Inspector just for that image sprite. So you can really see how messy that sprite not only looked itself, but also how messy the implementation of that sprite looked like. Again, this is a sprite just for reference. After the refactoring, we had embedded SVGs, so we switched to an embedded SVG approach, which you can see then only we used that code. And I think 6 months later, we then switched even to inline SVGs, which we could do because at that time we didn't generate enough revenue of the old IE browsers anymore, of the old Internet Explorer browsers, and decided that we can fully go with inline SVG. So nowadays we don't have an image sprite anymore. We have a clean icon library, which is in code. So basically you can push it to Git. You don't have to fiddle around with some PSD files to get your sprites. So I also spoke now a bit about assets. And we defeated the 50 Shades of Grey with establishing a new color palette. And until beginning from that time, nobody should use anymore his color picker to pick the code or the color code from a JPEG file. And this is also a comparison which is then also again convincing for example, for the management. We were able to reduce our unique font colors by 50%. We put a lot of effort into documentation and the code style guide. We use SASDoc to document our SCSS, to document our, how I like to call them, design system variables, which are basically the SAS variables which people should use to avoid that they always reinvent colors or spacings or all that stuff. And we integrated Silent and set some rules to help people following those guidelines. Especially if new people jump into the development team, then we could already see, okay, they maybe start again, or they are not completely aware of this huge system and what's all belonging into it. And then with that, we help them to follow that system. E.g. with Silent, it is possible to check whether a color has assigned a variable, or maybe something like you never should do red, blue, or yellow, or something like that. And you can also, for example, whitelist units so that people only use pixels or M or RAM values. And this is automatically then triggered as soon as somebody does a pull request. It gets triggered, all the stuff gets checked, and then we can actually ensure that people follow our design system guidelines. We put some effort into template documentation and created our kind of own standard for TwigDoc. We at Trivago, our main application is running on Symfony, PHP, bundled with a Twig template language. This is our pattern library, which is still based on the Brett Frost pattern lab.io. And I've just highlighted here the button, and you can basically see it. It's a very simple example, but it then explains what this pattern actually has for parameters and how to use them. Yeah, so basically we created documentation and spent a lot of effort into that. There went also some stuff wrong, especially in the beginning part. I stumbled upon an old helper CSS class. I just mentioned it in our Slack channel. I said I found a class. I will directly push it to master. Why should I do a pull request? Whatever. I will just clean up some old code I found. And yeah, 10 minutes later, people were complaining at my desk because actually 97% used the deprecated class and only 3% used the new class. This was also then the point where we decided, okay, we have now to focus a bit more into documentation. About scope. At Trivago, we have, of course, our main product, which drives the company. But I think overall, we have around 50 applications. And first, I was bold as I am. I said, maybe we can find a solution that we can press a button and all 50 applications get updated. This was my first vision, which I drew on a whiteboard. And everybody around was just like, Christoph, what are we trying to tell us? So I went over to our digital design system and team and asked them whether they are able to simplify this a bit. And they came up with that. It was not very simplistic, but everybody understood what I actually wanted to achieve. The issue is that all these applications on the right side, every application has a different backend stack and a front-end stack. So, but at least we were able to scope it a bit. So we tried to find solutions for applications which follow somehow the same stack. As said, from the 50 applications we have 18 internal tools, for example, for helping hoteliers to add content to Trivago or whatever. And here's a visualization, again, with the help of design, because I'm not that good in that, on how we achieved that with our admin tools. The most important part is here the pattern lab loader, which is a composer package which actually loads the patterns out of the pattern library repository. And nowadays, we only have to change a pattern once, and especially because those applications are not that client-side, they're basically mostly server-side applications. It was very easy for us to do that. So we now have already a pattern lab loader, which solves to automatically update the 18 internal applications. And we are nearly finished with our CSS components. We haven't found, as said, solution yet for the more client-side driven applications, but we are on it. A next learning is about dependencies, and I'm very happy that there was this talk about monorepos before. Because initially we had, I'm not that good in naming, Daisy and Trivi was our, is the name for our pattern lab repository. In the beginning it was even that bad that people had to copy and paste it, which didn't work out at all, of course. So we created a package which then consisted of the templates and the CSS, which we called trivago core patterns, which was a composer PHP package, which then basically helped to integrate it automatically into your application with a composer install or a composer update. But then this package grew very, very fast. So basically it just was a very big package at the end, and you changed something on a banner component which was only used in one of those 50 applications, and then you had to produce a breaking change. So we changed to a monorepo approach with Learner. And that's just a screenshot from our Bitbucket. So you can see I'm in master here, and I have these packages in my monorepo. As a visualization, as a very short visualization, you can see here I do a git status and I do a learner ls, and it basically shows me all of these packages which are inside this monorepo. And if I have then done any changes to the packages, I can publish them out of this monorepo to our npm enterprise. So we have our own npm enterprise system at trivago, where we then publish the packages to, which then looks at the end now like that. So basically, from this huge repository, we publish several npm packages, which can then be reused by the applications. And then I'm already nearly done. Just some data about design system. In general, it's always hard to justify somehow the business value of that, because it's a very, very long ongoing process. This sounds a bit funny, but also that is something which convinces people. If you go now to a team and they have never used this design system before, and they later go to the project manager and tell them, hey, I saved 2 weeks because I didn't have to recode all the stuff because I could already use it, because it was already there, then it's of course also convincing. Another metric which is also good, 16 contributors are also not that bad for such a system, and I'm very happy that nowadays 12 teams at trivago using that system, which are 15 applications. I basically, the internal tools, I define them here as one, otherwise it would be more. And that's how it looks nowadays. So you can see, that's our trivago hotel search, and you have our company pages, some microsites, and you can also see if you go or search a bit, or browse a bit on trivago and all the sub-applications, you can nowadays see that they are really more consistent. And 5 external companies are also using it. So nowadays, if we have some really time limit on a project, we are also able to maybe outsource a microsite, and people have this documentation. People can use the repositories, they can use the npm packages, and are very able to very fast build applications which have the look and feel of trivago. And we have 50% reduced bug reports. I'm pretty sure that's clear. If you have such a system, it of course massively reduces the amount of bugs. I'm Christoph. I'm leading the UI UX engineering team at trivago, and many thanks for attending my talk.
Thanks, Christoph, for this wonderful talk. Now we have another 3 minutes for Q&A, so if you have questions, just raise your hand. The mic will come to you. There is one question here. Where is the mic? Maybe we take this one. Or this one. Sorry.
Could you explain the meaning of this graph of the CSS that you had in a few parts of the slide?
Have you ever written CSS? So basically, if you have a selector, a class selector has a very low specificity. But if you then combine them or concatenate them, then the specificity gets higher. For example, I think an ID selector has a specificity of, terrible word, of 100. And if you would combine them, which you never should do, you should never combine ID selectors, then you would have 200. So, but I already mentioned, when I started at trivago, I opened the first SCSS file, and I'm not lying. The selector was basically 1 page long. So basically people started nesting really from the body to whatever, to the footer. So it was a nesting level of 10 classes, and then at the end, because it didn't work, they put even an important at the end. And this is how you get such a graph. If you want, I can maybe, if I find it later, I can show you one of those examples, how to create a specificity of 200 and 412.
But doesn't that happen quite easily with SAS and less and all that stuff?
Of course. Especially people, that's a good thing, because they introduced STSS, and then they started with this nesting, because you can very easily nest in SAS, and they basically started from the body, and then the first diff, and then an UL, an LI, and an A, and so on.
Any more questions? Here.
I don't know if I missed it, or in terms of the versions of the main application, did you keep multiple versions, or did you always do these changes on the main version?
You mean for the design system, whether we roll it out directly on all applications, or applications have different versions of this design system?
So if we focus on the main application for the search, did you serve a new version parallel with the old version, or did you always work on the master, so to speak, and you always have to the client?
No.
They always saw these latest changes.
No, we're not working in master. Sometimes I do, but then I'm because I have the rights to do it. But normally, no, of course, we don't do that. Every time we do something, we also release it as an A/B test. If we do bigger changes, and then we test it again and see how the metrics are, and then we roll it out. Also, I have to admit that the main product is not fully running on this design system. There's still legacy code in, so we still have some legacy areas. So that's basically the thing at trivago. We are growing very, very fast, and we cannot just allow ourselves to do a rebuild of the application. So we always do small steps, and sometimes we see, okay, we fail, and then we try to get our learnings and then move forward from there.